Navigating Betrayal webinar, podcast, and YouTube channel. I'm your host, Kaylee Dunn, betrayal navigation coach, betrayal trauma therapist for over a decade, and admin of this free Facebook group, Humans Navigating Betrayal. Today, I would like to introduce you to a colleague and friend, Geoff Steurer. Geoff Steurer is a licensed marriage and family therapist, author, podcaster, and speaker with over 25 years of experience treating couples, healing from the impact of sexual betrayal. He's the creator of Courageous Together, a revolutionary online couples betrayal trauma recovery program. He's the co-author of Love You Hate the Porn, co-host of the podcast From Crisis to Connection with his wife, Jody, and has produced workbooks, audio programs, courses, healing couples and individuals from the impact of sexual betrayal, unwanted pornography use, partner betrayal trauma, and broken trust. Woo! Such a long career and a history of really helping so many people. And I'm just so excited for us to discuss this sometimes tricky topic. And we're going to be talking about the timing of rebuilding as a couple after betrayal, something that I get asked a lot. In fact, I had a coaching session this week that we discussed this very thing. So I'm really excited to chat with Geoff today and for you guys to be a part of that discussion. So be sure to stick around till the end. You're welcome to pop questions. I'll keep an eye on the comment section here in the Facebook group. And so stick around to the end and we're going to answer those. So thank you so much, Geoff, for joining us. And before we start, let me know if I missed anything or if there's anything you'd like to share about yourself or say anything to our community before we jump right in.
No, thanks for having me. I think that's a long enough bio. It's perfect. So, no, it's just great to be with you.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad to have you here today. And I mean, you've been in this working with people who have struggled after betrayal, which is the people in our group are individuals who have experienced betrayal and in their lives, in their intimate relationships, in their close relationships. And so you really know these people well because you've been working with them for so long.
Yeah.
So, I guess to really start off this conversation, I want to ask, how can a betrayed partner, because that's who we're speaking to today, know if their partner's ready to rebuild with them? And what does that look like? Because we, of course, want to discuss safety before anything else, right?
Yeah, for sure. Just going to the safety things, I think if you're dealing with somebody in your relationship, your partner is actively being physically abusive or even emotionally abusive, which I get that there's layers of that, but ultimately, if you feel unsafe, meaning that like your nervous system can't settle down to the point where when you're around them, they're in the same room, or you anticipate them being around you, you just feel like you're going to die, or you just want to run away, or it just feels so unsafe, then you've got to take care of that first by either creating more distance or space or bringing in other supports or something to try and stabilize that, because couples work is absolutely impossible to even think about or care about if one person in that relationship feels like actively threatened all the time.
Yeah.
And, you may think, well, I've been betrayed. Shouldn't I feel actively threatened? Sure. Like you're going to feel anxious and uncertain about the future. But there is a difference between being uncertain and anxious about the future and wondering about your relationship and wondering about your reality versus wondering if you're going to even make it to the next day.
Right.
And wondering if like the people around you that you're caring for, if your environment is even safe and stable. And there
Mm-hmm.
are situations where those things absolutely have to be addressed um, in a really concrete, action-oriented way before we can talk about some of these other emotional, relational dynamics that probably need to be addressed, but not right now. So I would
Sure.
start there. Like that to me is just a very critical bar to look at. And if it's like, okay, we've cleared that bar, all right, then let's talk about what are some of the next things around couples work. So can we maybe just start with that?
Right. No, I mean it's heavy to just jump out of the gate there, but the
Yeah.
reality is there's so many people who will go to maybe general practitioners of couples work and they'll jump
Yes.
into like communication
Oh yeah.
or what are you doing to cause this person to betray you? You know, you kind of can go down that rabbit hole of and it's really damaging and harmful and adds double trauma. I think all therapists in the betrayal sphere have seen that from well-meaning therapists. So I really love that you're bringing up the physical safety component and then the emotional safety, that if legitimately this other person, I don't think they have my best interest at heart. Their goal is not to connect with me and to make this work. There's not a level of, oh my gosh, I screwed up. What can I do? How can I fix this? That they don't have my best interest at heart. And their goal is just to either hurt me or to do whatever they want, even if I'm hurt over and over and over and over again. That's something to look at first before you're considering really deep couples work, right? So there might
Yeah.
be some stabilization like you described. There might be some
Hmm.
having a clinician or a coach that's helping you get stabilized as you work through the individual issues that are going on there. But that's something to be really aware of. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say about this too that I think is so tricky is that, you're in a relationship with this person because I mean, you chose to be together. You know his family, you know his upbringing, I mean, you know a lot about what's going on, but this is not a time for, I would say, and please help me, I mean, please get what I'm saying with this. This is not time for the villain origin story. Okay?
Mm,
I mean, I love a good movie as much as the next person, but I
uh-huh.
don't think that this is the time to do a two-part series on the origin story of the Joker or somebody else. Like,
Right.
like why, how did they get here? How did they end up here? Like, that's a safe thing to explore in the safety of a movie theater. But when
Right.
it's like in your living room and they're actively dangerous and threatening and slamming doors and screaming at you, or these really hard things that I hate to have to talk about, this is not a time for you to go and start journaling and thinking about like, well, I wonder what's going on, or why, and let's, well, like, make sense because of this. And right now it's just like, what do I need to do so that I don't feel like I want to crawl out of my skin, or what do I need to do to like protect myself so we can have an adult, mature, safe conversation and relationship. Like, if you're
Absolutely.
at that level, this is not a time to explore reasons.
Right. Right. That's labor. I always kind of reframe that as labor for this other person to do with their therapist rather
100%.
than labor for you to do for them, because you doing that labor isn't going to do anything long term for them,
No, and a
right?
lot of the
It's just
times they want
consuming
you
your
to.
energy.
Right. And a lot of times they want you to do that labor so that they don't have to confront the way they're treating you or behaving.
Right.
It's a way
Right.
to disarm you and kind of distract you from that. So I don't think everybody's like that. I don't
No.
think that every case is like that, but the people that are in that situation need to hear this.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, that's a really good way to front load this conversation so that as we dig into these nuanced discussions around reconnection and
Right.
reestablishing health and safety in relationships, which, by the way, we believe is possible and we've seen it happen
Yes.
over and over again, we also are really clear that we're not talking about walking people into really unsafe territory, but instead, we've always got that reality on the back burner that if it turns this way or if it feels this way or if it goes this way, that's not what we're talking about, right? if
Yeah, you're
it's
not
if
going to
it's
set up a medical tent in the middle of the battlefield and start working on soldiers that have been shot. You're going to get
Mhm.
them to safety first and create some stable conditions, some safe, hygienic, sterile conditions where you can really work inside those wounds. But if there's somebody who's actively throwing dirt on you and like bullets and things, like, I mean, it just literally is impossible to do the deeper healing work
Yeah.
when there's active, ongoing betrayal. Now, is there going to be high emotion? Is there going to be defensiveness and struggle and immaturity and patterns and things that have to be addressed? Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. So don't expect them to be like fully regulated, this perfect, person who's soft and thoughtful and kind and responding well.
Hmm.
We're not looking for that. We're just looking for basic stability here.
Yeah. Well, and what we talk about often is like they may not even be fully ready, but if they're willing, if the betrayer, if the person who betrayed has a willing heart, then
100%.
that's workable, right? If you
Yeah.
if you have someone who's like, yeah, I screwed up,
Hmm.
and owns that and says, I don't know what to do with that, and I'm kind of a
Start there.
mess.
Yep.
And then again, their behaviors aren't so harmful that we're not
Right.
functioning. And like you mentioned, yeah, some of the obvious ones are going to be like sexual assault, physical assault, but you could also be recognizing that for some betrayed partners, and there's nothing wrong with this, just being in that space is harmful, is really unsafe for them. for whatever reason. And so recognizing our
Yeah.
own tolerances is really important, and being really honest about that is really important too.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have to justify what you want in that moment. If you
Mm-hmm.
want some space, to be able to say, I need some space, or I need to be able to, and for them to say like, okay, like almost like whatever you need to stabilize this, there's a deference, a willingness, like you said, a humility around, I've screwed this up. I need to really be
Yeah.
in a position of taking care of you, emotional first aid, kind of stabilization mindset is critical. If you're not getting that and they continue to attack or blame or those kinds of things, that's where the strategies or the things we're talking about today are not for you right now.
Mm-hmm.
You can, if you want to keep listening or bookmark them for later, that's fine. But I would never want anybody in that situation to believe that somehow they're doing it wrong, or why can't we get to that place that Geoff and Kaylee are talking about, because
Yeah.
it's just not the right time for it. Timing is everything. Triage is everything.
Yeah. Yep. 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 Perfect. All right, let's move into it then, right? So with that initial discussion, with that understanding, so the next question I have for you is that there's a lot of mixed messages about whether people can work together in recovery or if they should work on themselves individually, and then just kind of be like two ships passing in the night, or can they work together? So can you talk a little bit about what options people have?
Yeah, weaving these recoveries, right? The two individual recoveries and the couples recovery, it's tricky. It's hard for, even really seasoned clinicians to get this balance right, because we're dealing with a lot of moving variables. And
Mm-hmm.
but yes, like all three of those matter. If you just focus on individual recoveries and just don't, like you said, two ships passing in the night, then you're ignoring the very reality of the fact that you're pair bonded with this person, and that you're still looking to them for some level of emotional and physical regulation in your body and your emotions, which
Mm-hmm.
we're wired to seek out and notice and care about. And you're
Mm-hmm.
not immature or codependent or regressive or whatever for wanting that, or clingy or whatever the words may be. You're a bonded human being who's relied on another person to be there for you. That's what we agree to when we partner up with somebody, that you're going to have my
Mm-hmm.
back, you're going to care about how I feel, you're going to be there for me when I'm hurting. So you can't just shut that off while you're doing your
Mm-hmm.
individual work. But at the same time, if everything is let's just be together all the time and talk about us all the time, then you're going to run into something we call mutualizing, which is basically assigning joint equal responsibility for the betrayal,
Mm-hmm.
which you may not think you're doing, but when basically it's like, well, our relationship is struggling because we need to do this thing together. We need to communicate better, or we. That's going to unintentionally, and sometimes intentionally, okay, but most of the time unintentionally, put the balance of responsibility on somebody who didn't cause it and can't fix that.
Yeah. Well, and I'd add the mutualizing, not only can we naturally fall into it accidentally, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, I think it's getting better, but historically, I feel like a lot of betrayed partners were kind of made to feel that way by professionals at times,
That's so true. Yeah,
or
for sure.
by well-meaning, of course, or by family members or friends. So many people talk about when they disclose the betrayal to a friend or a family member or a religious leader, there's this like, well, did you do this? Did you do
Yeah.
this? Did you try
Right.
this? And those kind of like small these people are trying to be empathetic, but these small messages kind of send that message that somehow some part, because we do want to believe in that pair bondedness, which is true and we've talked about, but then it kind of bleeds over.
Yeah.
And so like you said, it's kind of walking down this line that's very difficult for society and all of us to do.
The perfect balance, in my view, would be the betrayed partner getting the emotional life support to deal with the impact on, and I'm just going to be gendered about this just for simplicity, on
Yeah.
a husband and a wife, we'll just say, the betrayed partner getting her body and emotions stabilized, like emotional ICU, where the focus is on helping her regulate, breathe, sleep, eat,
Mm-hmm.
function, take care of
Yeah.
herself and those she's responsible for, and be able to wake up every day and feel like she has her emotional balance, her physical balance. Like that is goal number one. And that's her individual recovery, like from go. And
Mm-hmm.
then she can build on to other things around, using her voice and healthy limits and boundaries and relationship stuff and whatever. Like she can get into all that grief and loss work and all the things we do individually with people. His priority as the person who broke the trust is going to be, for one, stopping the behaviors that created the broken trust. So stopping the bleeding. But then it goes into empathy, accountability,
Mm-hmm.
ownership, telling the truth, getting honest about it, being able to tolerate his own story about what he did and how he got there, and him carrying the burden of trying to make sense of that and how to be a healthier person. And then that's those are two very active recoveries individually. And those
Mm-hmm.
then really set the stage now for the couples work to start to phase safely forward. So initially, the couples work does not look like what you would think of traditional marriage counseling or marriage work, which is let's just communicate better, or let's just figure out, how to improve our sexual intimacy or whatever. It's none of that at the
Yeah.
beginning. At the very beginning, it's things like, um, safety, stability. How do you coexist together? How do you can we make agreements around even just how our living space is set up? How do we coordinate and talk about things in a way that's not explosive?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just a lot of boundary setting and organizing and structure, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
couples, because most folks still live together after betrayal. Some
Mm-hmm.
don't, but a lot of them do,
Yeah.
and you have to be able to structure that environment. So the couples recovery isn't mutualizing in this sense of like, what are we both going to do to make this relationship better? It's we live together. One person's responsible for creating this betrayal. The other person's trying to stabilize. How can together we support that process?
Yeah. Yep.
That's the early couples work. So when,
Right.
when, when are couples ready for couples work? Well, if you understand what the work is
Right.
immediately.
Right. And I think, one message that I noticed in my own story early on, really early on, was this kind of like, well, you go over here and you do your stuff, and he'll go over there and do his stuff. And you just, stay on your side of the street, we've always heard. But
Yeah,
I just kept going, gosh, but there's still a street there. Like the street didn't go away because we're obviously talking about sides of it. And so what I
exactly.
hear you saying is that early work and the discussions and any kind of work that you do as a couple is really structural and safety creating, and
Yeah.
then making sure that we're putting the labor and the effort on the person who needs to do that labor, and then doing the support and the ICU for the harm that's been done
Hmm.
for the betrayed partner. So I love that. So you're saying immediately there's it's silly to say that there's no couple work unless, it's like the 20 or 10 to 20% that split
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah,
But for the
for
vast
sure.
majority of couples, whether they stay together long term or not, they're staying together at the initial stages of crisis.
Yeah. And so I think when people say, well, do we just focus on ourselves? I think that's an incomplete answer. I think the answer is, well, sure, yes, please do. And let's add this other part, which is being honest about the power differential, which is one person hurt the
Hmm.
other person. One person overpowered the other with secrecy, with betrayal, with crossing lines, with
Yeah.
blame, whatever. And let's be honest about that arrangement. And what do we need to do together to level that back out? And the way you level that back out is the betrayed partner understands that and expects the other person to do that work. And the betrayed
Yeah.
partner, or the person who broke the trust, understands that process, and they're doing everything they can to elevate them through telling the truth and honoring and respecting and being careful and deferential and stopping behaviors, all the things we talked about, to level
Yeah.
this back out so that there's equal power, equal partnership, equal ability to go forward together. And that's very much a couple's process. it's thinking about it as how is this affecting both of us together versus what is just my work to do.
Right, right. That's really important. And I
Yeah.
think that then when we ignore the street, that's a big piece that that society, that the work has missed over the years, because the betrayed partner is often sitting there going like, what do you mean ignore
Oh yeah.
that I've been treated this way? Like ignore the relationship dynamic that is
Exactly.
really damaging. And so we don't want to ignore that. Instead, we want to restructure and recreate a safe space right from the get-go. I wonder, in your work, do you notice if inviting that discussion early on, and we do address power dynamics and integrity and those sorts of things right away, does that kind of throw flags quicker about whether this is there more awareness about the willingness uh, earlier on? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think it becomes an invitation, and I think when
Mm,
you can hold it up as an invitation, a choice to say, do you want to work on it this way? And I'm thinking specifically to the person who broke the trust. It's really an invitation for them to frame this as, are you willing to stretch out your hand and help your partner get up off the ground? Are you willing to be in that position of helping them feel safe and better, and helping them understand that they're in a tremendous position of power and influence where they may feel like, well, nothing I do is ever going to work, whatever. Not true.
mm-hmm.
There's so much they can do. In fact, their betrayed partner is counting on them relationally to carry the lion's share of it. And so
Yeah.
so they aren't powerless. And so helping someone who's broken trust embrace that is an important conversation early
Mm-hmm.
on. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very much a relational conversation, but it's not something that the betrayed partner can keep begging for. So that's why often
Right.
having outside help and direction, instruction, education is critical for both people, so that that information, that structure can be that kind of an invitation. Because
Yeah.
if a betrayed partner is constantly having to beg for, to be taken seriously or to have safety or those kinds of things, that just undermines the safety more. So
Right, for her. And I think what I hear you saying is having this team approach, having sponsors or and therapists and coaches and all these people, part of their job at the beginning stages is helping hold him accountable to what's
yes,
happened, and
yes,
to do that labor for her in a way. I mean,
uh-huh,
not for her fully, because she has to also, like you said originally, like hold him accountable and recognize that it's not okay for him to hold all the knowledge, and that that knowledge is the power that he's then holding over her in that one down dynamic situation. But um
I mean, shouldn't we all be advocating for the person who just got run over,
you'd think,
right?
you'd think.
Shouldn't we all, the obviously the helpers, but also the person who did it? Like, this shouldn't be a
Yeah,
hit and run. Shouldn't we
right.
all be? I mean, that to get everybody oriented toward stabilization and safety and working, that's the team couple, that's the approach early on. And so
Yeah.
stabilizing all that is, it happens sooner in some relationships than others. I mean, it's everybody's
Yeah.
different, but it's very much a developmental task for the healing of the couple.
Mm-hmm.
And if that part never really clicks into place, literally anything you do after that's not going to work. It just won't.
Right.
You might go through the motions, you might check the boxes, you might go to, 2 years of therapy or read all the books. But if that heart shifted, that awareness of like,
Mm,
what can I do to help you? I did this to you. That hasn't taken hold in the person who broke the trust. Couples work is not safe to do. And so some of the other things, so telling the truth, like a truth, we call it a disclosure, formal therapeutic disclosure. That has to be a piece of this prior to couples work. Obviously, stopping any harmful behaviors or abusive behaviors. We talked about that. Even just both people wanting to do it, both people wanting to stay in the relationship, or even hoping to stay in the relationship is a
mm-hmm.
prerequisite. If you have mixed agendas about like, well, I don't even want this, then
Yeah.
I would work on that before you can come together and do the work, which seems obvious, but some people are
Yeah.
so uncertain about where they are, which is fine, but you got to be honest about it.
Honest about it. Yeah.
And and then any sort of untreated or undiagnosed mental health or physical health issues are
Yeah.
always going to, take over if you don't address those. And that could be
Yeah.
everything from undiagnosed or untreated depression or anxiety or panic, ADHD, to physical health issues that just make it difficult to, again, stabilize the relationship. And when you get those things in place, and there's been enough work and safety and stability, then you can start having conversations around rebuilding trust as a couple, and it
Yeah.
goes so much better.
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is that that early work is technically couples work in a way, in that we're not ignoring the relationship, especially, I mean, if they're living together still, and that the individuals are doing their own work, but any work that they're doing is influencing that
Correct.
relationship. And that would include, like, a disclosure is usually a relational process, where the betrayer does all the work, the person who broke the trust does all the work to create the disclosure, to do the polygraph if they do one, to share it, but the partner's there to hear it. So there's a relational component to that.
Yes.
But what I hear you saying is that's kind of a part of that, like, first steps, initial work before you get into that deeper attachment, reunification, trust building, getting us to where we feel like any old couple, because
Yeah, exactly.
we know in the data that couples who are able to get to that work and they do that work after infidelity and betrayal, on paper, they'll look like a couple who never experienced betrayal. Those studies have been shown. And so it's
If not
possible,
stronger.
if not
Yeah.
stronger. So it's
Yeah.
possible. It's not like we're talking about something that's never happened.
Correct.
It's in the data and it happens, but there needs to be kind of this particular way that we move through the relationship, rather than trying to kind of put the cart before the horse, and
Exactly.
get in too deep too fast, and then it's can be kind of harmful.
Yeah, and maybe using another visual here. Building a house to me is a great metaphor. John Gottman used it. Other people have used it, which is, if your partner who broke your trust is constantly saying to you, "Well, what about my needs?" Right, all the time. That to me is a preference akin to paint color on a wall. And you're not talking about paint color on a wall when you haven't even poured the foundation yet. Just
Mm-hmm.
not a thing. It's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
paint color on what wall? Like, what are you
Mm-hmm.
talking about? There's no walls here.
Right.
So let's get the foundation poured. Let's get some things in place, get some walls up, get some drywall. And then at some point when it's sensible and let's talk about preferences. Well, that's so far down the road for couples to talk about the partner who broke the trust, their preferences or their love language or those kinds of things. Like, all that stuff
Right.
is critical for healthy relationships long term. Just like painting a wall is pretty important, but it's not structural.
Right.
You can live in a
Right.
house with bare walls.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those kinds of needs and those kinds of things do matter. So sometimes that'll get thrown in the face of the betrayed partner, like, well, don't my needs matter? And then you're sitting there thinking, as a rational, caring human being, like, well, yeah, it does matter. You should have that.
Right.
But let's get clear on the order. That matters more.
Yeah. So important, because we can get really lost in the weeds putting paint
Mm-hmm.
on nothing. Right. And really
Spraying
trying
into
to
the
just,
air.
and
Just
I, and
like,
I've heard people, I've worked
yeah,
with lots of people or heard lots of stories of people say, man, I've been therapy for 2 years and we're just going in circles and circles. And often it boils down to
yeah,
those foundational trusts. There hasn't been a disclosure. There hasn't been these, fundamental steps for especially for the person who broke the trust, to be in a place to do the type of work they're trying to do. And so that can
yeah,
really slow us down. So
yeah.
I wanted to know, I mean, we've kind of talked about this a little bit. So if you wanted to, go back to it, you can. But if someone's listening today and they're like, we're not in that scary abuse stuff that you talked about at the beginning. We both want to do some work. We're not sure what to do. We're both kind of floating. What are some first steps that people can take to rebuild the relationship? And you mentioned a little bit of it, right? Just the individual work. But then once we get maybe even through that, and they've done a disclosure maybe, or they're working on one. What are those next steps that they're going to be taking?
Yeah, yeah, great. And if you're in that position, um, I'm happy for you. I really am. Like, that to me means that both of you are working really hard. And I love hearing about couples that are, when they're coming to me and they're saying like, we're ready. What do we do? And it's like, yeah, good for both of you. That there's a lot of choices that each of you have made to be in that place, especially the person who's broken the trust has done a lot to bring it to that point, but it also the betrayed partner. So what I would say is I I love the idea, and I teach this a lot early in my work is, and you can do this even before things are totally stabilized, which is just honesty and checking in. So sort of generically, we might call it a check-in, or a colleague of mine calls it syncing up. But it's the idea that you're going to come together, and initially it's going to be focused around maybe safety things around like, have you acted out or crossed the lines that you promised you wouldn't cross? So sometimes it's just initially about that.
Mm-hmm.
But then you can start to expand that. And if you have that ritual already built in, and sometimes that happens just like in therapy, and then maybe it happens once a week or maybe every day, but then eventually it becomes more conversational and it becomes more structured around what's going on for you? What do you need? And this is a fantastic place to start practicing deeper levels of empathy for the person who broke the trust, where and place to practice a lot more courage and speaking up and having a voice and
Mm-hmm.
knowing yourself and trusting yourself as a betrayed partner. Where, let's say that he asks her, I'd love to know how you're feeling right now. And so she has this moment where she goes, I can stay superficial and say I'm fine, or I can say, when you touched me this way yesterday, it felt really like objectifying or really hurtful or whatever. It felt familiar. It felt old, like you were, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where she can be brave and bring this up as an example. And then he can practice accountability, compassion, empathy.
Mm-hmm. His
And these,
regulation.
yep, exactly. And then regulating his own emotions and dealing with his own shame or guilt. These moments, this is the recovery work of the couple right away, which is
Yeah.
her bringing her real self to the conversation and him showing up and staying regulated and open and compassionate and accountable. And that interaction will go on over and over and over again, countless times as
Yeah.
the couple starts to rebuild. And to me, that core interaction is probably one of the toughest ones to get right because it's so real and so raw, which is why maybe we start off talking in a more structured way of like, let's go through,
Check, check,
accountability around
check.
this, or let's check
Yeah.
in with these steps and let's keep it really
Uh-huh.
structured. But then it starts to evolve into actually you're practicing intimacy, you're practicing being real.
Yeah.
And that's something a couple can start doing in a really structured way and keep that in place and then start taking more emotional
Yeah.
risks as you go along.
And then it evolves. Yeah. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
listening and you hear, Geoff say, have empathy for the betrayer and that flags something for you, just, he and I did a podcast, I don't even know, 2 or 3 years ago on that
Yeah.
topic of empathy for the betrayer and why it actually can be a really powerful tool for you in your intuition work, and your trusting yourself work and when to consider that. So,
Yeah.
it's okay if that's triggering now. It might be more like, oh, we might be more in those checkbox
Yep.
check-ins, but over time, like you're describing this evolution from, I really like this. We're doing back to the house, right? Because you need the scaffolding up in place, and that's kind of that scaffolding around the structure. And then
Mm-hmm.
over time, you take the scaffolding down, and then there's something there
Yeah.
to work with, and you're
Yeah.
able to just communicate in a deeper way. And like you said, thousands of iterations of those moments where, and lots of mistakes, by the way, and lots of
Yep.
hard moments where your partner does go into shame and you are triggered by that shame and you cry about his shame and he cries about his shame, and then you make up and you find a way through, right? You're going to have those moments too. And then he goes and calls his sponsor or his coach, and then there's going to be these moments, but then over time that evolves into something new and different and better, then probably, unless you were raised where somewhere you were magically taught this stuff, my guess is the relationship is then going to be stronger and better than it was before, or could have been, before. So,
The couple's work is going to feel risky. The couple moving toward each other for both
yeah,
people,
scary.
and the betrayed partner is going to be constantly wondering, does he care about how bad I'm hurt? Does he see it, right?
Yeah,
And the partner who's broken the trust is constantly going to be wondering, like, does she see that I'm trying? Does she see that my efforts I'm trying, I'm doing the best I
yeah,
can? And I would say to the person who broke the trust, keep trying. keep making efforts. It's like with, the way we build trust with a baby. It's like we get it wrong more than we get it right.
Yeah.
We're constantly trying and guessing, and they'll tell us no or shake their head, and we keep trying. We love them. We keep trying. We pick them up. So that trying is relational work for someone who's broken
Yeah.
trust, willing to tolerate some of the messiness and the imperfection of it. Obviously, if it's like so damaging and hurtful, then please don't keep trying to do that.
Right.
I mean, that's common sense, hopefully, but I'm talking about trying to do the really healthy things like checking in and talking and asking questions and opening up and listening
Yeah.
and those kinds of things. I think the lion's share of that initially is going to fall on the person who broke the trust. They're going to carry the hope of the relationship. They're going to carry the possibility of a relationship. They're going
Yeah.
to lead with that and demonstrate that there is a relational space that they're willing to
Hmm.
be a part of. And the betrayed partner, in my case, most cases, it's women, are oriented so strongly toward relationship already, socially, biologically, whatever, that like they're naturally going to like be interested in that if it's a safe place to come to. If
Yeah.
it's not, then likewise, they're going to like have a very authentic reaction to not get close to it.
Yeah.
And that's part of your intuition work. I know you do a lot with Kaylee, is like paying attention to that and honoring that.
Yeah.
And that's relational work too.
It is. It is. Yeah. So I love what you're saying here about, just keep trying, right? Just keep swimming in a way, right? I think what I've noticed a lot is that there'll be some guys that will go to a specialized therapist. They have a willing heart. They do a
Mm-hmm.
disclosure. They say, "Okay, I'm going to be fully honest and open." They're ready to go. They do that. They stop the betraying behaviors. They put in all the labor and effort that it takes, which is very difficult to do. And they stop the betraying behaviors, whether they're addictive or habitual or coping or whatever, compulsive. And they might need to do some, like you mentioned, they might have some underlying comorbidities like depression or anxiety
Yeah.
they need to get treated. So that's a whole host of work, right? They've probably put a year, 2 years in to get to this point. And then their partner is still saying, but I don't feel loved. I don't feel cared for. I don't feel important. You don't prioritize me. You don't prioritize us.
Right.
Sure, good job. Good job. You're not cheating on me anymore. But there's this, and there's of course some understandable bristliness for her or for the
Yeah.
betrayed partner. And then you're saying, okay, there's something relational that's getting missed here, and they can try that and they can step into that. Where are they going to get that information? Geoff, is where you get that information. So
Is that my
tell them,
cue?
that's your cue to tell them a little bit about where can this couple then go to learn what those things that they need to keep trying. What are they?
Yeah, well, yeah, I thank you. I mean, yeah, for sure. This has been my body of work for a lot of years. This is what I care about, which is helping couples do this relational recovery type work from an attachment perspective, which basically means that we're not ignoring the fact that we're pair bonded and that we have this energy between each other that we got to figure out how to shape and manage. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I have a podcast called From Crisis to Connection where we talk about the whole range of the crisis stuff all the way through long-term connection and all phases of that. I wrote a book with Mark Chamberlain called Love You, Hate the Porn, which is very much a relational approach to this recovery. And that's a resource that maps out ways to start thinking about and doing this type of work. And so there's a lot of great stuff in there. And then, as you mentioned in my introduction, I have a new program that I'm actually just testing right now. It's in beta, and I'll be doing a full release of this program in February, which is called Courageous Together, and it's an online couples recovery program where each person works their own individual path and works it together using a really unique map that shows the intersection of all these different recoveries and how to weave them all together with ongoing coaching and support from me, but also having a lot of things you can work on inside the program. And so it's something that is very I would say my goal, my sort of mission in life is to reduce the complexity of this as much as possible while still honoring the complexity of it.
Yeah.
Basically to say, look, if you feel like it's overwhelming and complex, then you're doing it right, probably.
Yeah.
But let's do everything we can to slow it down and simplify it and give you clear markers of where you are, where to go, what to do next. And that's my hope inside of my program. And the work I do is to help you find your place in that process, because every couple is going to be at a different point. And so there's not really a one size fits all response, which is what a lot of people get when they just go do traditional marriage counseling, which is, well, John Gottman says, just, start doing this and that should, and it's like, it's not that simple. You got to
Yeah.
recognize there's been a major betrayal here that is organizing so much. And there's maybe other patterns around compulsive behaviors or a shame or abuse or things that have to be named and addressed to make the couples work happen. And all that complexity is really what I'm interested in helping people sort out and make
Yeah.
sense of, and do their healing inside of that. And the good news is that you can do it. It works. People really do build, like you said, better relationships.
Yeah.
That you meet them on the street and see their relationship and think they'd never been through anything hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Well,
possible.
I do want to say there's two main things that as you've workshopped it with me over the last while, as you've been building it, and I know you've workshopped it with other professionals as well. There's two main things that have really stood out to me with this Courageous Together program. One is how important it's been for you to really, I mean, and I know you've done this for 25 plus years, but, and that's always been important to you, is how important it is for you to really deeply understand the betrayed partner's experience and to never undermine that experience or put the betrayed partner in a place where they're being victim shamed, where they're being
Right.
told that they're doing something, that they caused something. And I think that you're really attuned to that in a way that I think is really remarkable, and that's something that's always important to you and always on your mind. So I really appreciate that work that you do, and that's coming out in this program, I believe. And the other thing
Yeah.
that I really like that I hear people talk about all the time, because of the complexity and because you can pick up a book, right? So you can grab, my shelves are covered in books. You could grab one book and it's really just a slice of the story. You're
Correct.
really just getting one little slice of the story. You're like, oh, this is great that I read about this tiny little part, right? Maybe it's about crisis and safety, or maybe it's about, you know,
Boundaries or,
boundaries, or,
yeah.
you can get all these little
Mm-hmm.
slices. I'm like, even my program is like a very specific part of healing and recovery. But what I love about what you've decided to create, that I think, your illustrator kind of came to you. So I think there's some maybe things from the divine that have come to create this, I would say, is
Yeah.
that I get asked all the time, but like, what's the big picture? And I'm a big picture thinker too. And so to go, but like, where's this going? And if I pick up this book, am I at the right spot? Or if I read this thing, is this right for me now? And like you said, every person's story is different. And you're going to
Yeah.
weave it together differently for everyone. But the map that you've created, I think, is really unique in showing how couples can do this together, without mutualizing, without adding to abuse, without adding trauma or responsibility or labor to the betrayed partner. And I think
Yeah.
that's really unique and really unheard of, to be honest. So to be able to show people this visual picture and to walk through those steps, because I've seen the picture, it's pretty awesome. To be able to say, oh, there's an end from the beginning. I mean, in real life, we always say real life doesn't have happily ever afters.
Yeah.
New hard things happen, right? You have a
There's no finish
child,
line,
or
right?
there's no real finish line. But in many ways, when there's no more betrayal and there's no more trauma, and those things have been healed, or you have a pattern of growth in those areas, you really can see the end from the beginning. And I think that is going to give so many people a lot of peace and hope, rather than just trying to maybe like Frankenstein together their own thing without really knowing where they're even headed. So those are the
Yeah.
two main things I really like about this program. I'm excited to share with people.
Well, that's awesome, Kaylee. You were paying attention. I appreciate you picking up on that, because that's exactly right. And you're right. And that's been the blessing and the challenge of creating this, is that it's kind of like if you give a mouse a cookie, those children's books, right? It's like it just all of a sudden it dominoes into so many other areas. You're like, well, let's start with this. And all of a sudden I've got the whole map. And as I did this, I thought, you know what? Like, let's at least create a framework so people can orient and place themselves in the journey. And if they
Yeah.
want to go deeper in some of these areas, like intuition or boundaries or shame or some of these areas that oftentimes need a lot more individual attention, you at least have a map to come back to and say, okay, that fits in here.
Right.
Or from here, I go to here.
Yep.
And for most couples, we know after working with this for so many years and the research and everything, we know kind of what that journey looks like. And you're right, this illustrator that created the map, that's probably one of my most joyful professional experiences is creating this with him over the last year and a half. He's not a therapist, and we've just had such an incredible time workshopping and talking through. And he'd present it one way, and I'd be like, "That doesn't feel right," or
Mm-hmm.
and it's just really amazing to see it all come together. So yeah, I'm a God-fearing person, and I absolutely believe that a lot of this is so much bigger than me. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I appreciate the endorsement and just the chance to talk about it, because it's I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you're highlighting too. It's always concerning if someone's like, I've created the one thing that will solve all problems, the one ring to rule them all. I'm always like, so for you to say, you may get on this path and go, oh, shame. Yeah, I read about it. I listened to the videos about it. I did the worksheet on it. I've got more work to do here. Then you
Yeah.
go to a shame specialist, or you do a
Yep.
shame program, or you
That's
find a
right.
shame coach, or you go to your therapist and you say, hey, do you know anything about shame? Can you work through this with me? Right. And so it gives, and then you do, and then you come back and you go, okay, I'm not perfect at it, but I know a lot more, and now I
Yep.
can take that next step. Or you keep taking steps. Well, this one's on the side that you've got to work on, or a childhood wound. You go, I've got that, so I'm going to go do an EMDR intensive with Kaylee. No, I'm going to go do an EMDR intensive
Please.
on that wound,
Yeah.
and then I can hop back on this path here.
Exactly.
And so I love that you're kind of saying this is a team approach, even though you really have this cool app and this picture that can really provide couples who are wanting to do the work together, just really that step by step how they can
Yeah.
get to those statistics that we see about couples who make it work, and not just dragging themselves to the finish line, but really joyfully, and
Yeah.
become just change makers for their families and for the people that surround them. So I love that.
Yeah, I
So
don't want people to stop after crisis stabilization. I want them to recognize that they don't just have to put out the fire, that they can build something that never existed before. That's
yeah.
really beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, we're kind of heading into the time here.
Hmm.
I wondered if, and I'll check on see if we have any questions or comments here, but I wondered if you had any stories or lessons that you have seen over the years that you'd like to share, kind of success or lessons learned that people have been able to do as they've rebuilt their relationships, obviously keeping things confidential.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I would say that I would say that sort of like the typical present, like to me, the couple that's probably doing the best kind of work, they're following that balance. And so what I see is a willingness. It's almost like I see from these couples, the guy that broke the trust, the best word I could use is like he's devastated.
Mm,
He's devastated.
mm-hmm,
He feels broken hearted and broken
mm-hmm.
that he did this, that this is a part of his story, that he hurt this person he swore he would protect. Like when that shift happens, it makes it safe for her to now like bring stuff to him, to talk about things, to work as a team.
Yeah,
And those are the success stories. When I see that happen, I don't worry about the couple as much anymore.
yeah.
They still need guidance and support and direction, but that major shift, when that happens,
Mm,
it changes everything.
yeah, that's a big
So
sign.
if that hasn't happened yet in your relationship and you're listening to this as a betrayed partner, please expect that. Do not settle for anything less than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you kind of, for those listening to the podcast, you can look over on the YouTube channel, but he's looking down the camera and just saying, hey, you can expect this, and I've heard you say that before. Your expectations are not, you might be told this by your partner, you might be told this by other people, that these expectations are unrealistic or you're overreacting. But absolutely, if you are really relational, and if you know kind of your own self-worth, that should be expected. That
Uh-huh.
someone who's harmed you and deceived you so heavily should feel devastated.
Uh-huh.
We don't want them in a shame ball collapsing and then you
No,
having it demanding you caretake them. You don't want that. But someone who's saying, holy crap, this is what I've done. I can't believe it. I'll do whatever it takes. That's really, really a necessary step to the type of healing that you're looking for in that relationship.
that's right. We're
Um,
always so moved by, the stories, examples of someone, like you could say like a hit and run in a parking lot, for somebody who like does that and then leaves a note with their phone number and insurance information, right?
right,
It's like, oh, they care. Like they're affected by this. They want to do the right. Like when that happens, everything's easier. It just is
right.
easier. It's not easy, but it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
And that shift, that willingness to take accountability and be impacted by what's happened, what you did is a huge shift. And if you're going to put your life back in someone else's hands, that to me is absolutely something you can expect.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I know we could talk all day about this type of stuff, but I'm so, so grateful for you to come and to really talk about hope and possibility. I know that that can be hard to hear, especially from those who are in the crisis phase
I
or who are
know.
really early
Yes.
on. But I also think it's good to paint the picture start to finish. And it sometimes when it hurts, what hurts is us knowing like, I'm never going to be there. Like
Yeah,
he's
I
never
know.
going to go there. And that can be kind of heartbreaking to hear, but also sometimes good to hear too.
Yeah.
Just to give that information and let it sit, right? Let
Yeah.
it sit and take breaks and all the things you need to do to take care of yourself. But to know that what possibilities do exist in some circumstances. So anyway, thank you so, so much for sharing with us, Geoff. I so appreciate it. Let's see if I've got any questions. So she asks, how do you get disclosure from a partner that doesn't even feel they were betraying you? They've stuck with, I didn't have sex, it's not betraying. But they were doing some other things, sexting and meeting with people. And
Yeah, this is probably more of an intuition question, but I would just say that um, just directly, like they don't get to decide whether you were betrayed or not, right? Like, and it's one of those things where it's like, can they care and take seriously about why that feels like a betrayal? Are they willing to stay curious and stay open and like have that conversation? I mean, this doesn't just have to be like, I didn't do it, so then we're done talking about it.
yeah,
That's power and control.
yeah,
So it's like, no, this matters to me. This hurt. Like, let's talk. Like, and for them to like be curious and to like look at it and like that's where you go with it. So there may be bigger red flags there.
yeah. Yep. I really appreciate the way that you said that.
Yeah.
I have seen people who say, well, I don't have a moral, I've seen betrayers say, well, I didn't grow up with a moral compass that said X, Y, and Z was a form of betrayal. So when their partner's reacting, they're very confused by that. But when they see it, because they care about that relationship, they tune into it and they say, okay, let's do a disclosure. I'll stop the behavior. I don't know if I can yet because I've been doing this since I was 10 or
Yeah.
whatever. But to them, it wasn't betrayal, but they see that it was and they're soft hearted. I have seen that. So if
Yeah.
you might be thinking, well, that doesn't happen because it's his morals and his truth. And so his truth, but there is a relational thing here.
There is. And in my
Um,
experience, it's likely there was secrecy around it. So you got to pay attention to that too. So they
right.
obviously knew you didn't like it or
Right.
something, right?
Or that
So
it was
yeah.
something there. Right.
Hmm.
Exactly. Exactly. Let's see. How do I get my husband to understand that saying I'm sorry is not enough?
Well, the I'm sorry is living and doing all the things we've talked about here.
Yeah.
So like that's the I'm sorry. So if those things aren't happening, like is there a willingness to look at that and be
Mm-hmm.
open to that?
Mm-hmm.
It's way more powerful than I'm sorry. And sometimes I'm sorry is a way to dismiss having to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. So tune into that with your gut,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah. Okay. So I think that's it on questions, but
Okay.
I do want to give you a minute if you'd like. Is there anything you'd like to share, or just kind of leaving last remarks to someone who's experiencing betrayal or has experienced betrayal?
Yeah, I just really want you to know that I know you never asked for this. I know you never like signed up for a relationship where this was going to happen to you. So you didn't create it. You didn't ask for it. You didn't deserve it. It's definitely not fair. And so with all of that, I also want you to know that you're not done either, that you absolutely have an opportunity here to pull inside and self-advocate and commit to living a life that looks and feels different with what you now know. And it's all information. It's all information about yourself, about your relationship. And you absolutely can take all of that and shape a life that is healthy, that is thriving, that is supportive to you and those you love, that may or may not involve the person who hurt you. But you're not done. You're not done. Don't believe for 1 minute that this is the final chapter of your life. And I just have tremendous respect and admiration for anyone who is willing to do the work post betrayal, because you could certainly just sit down and curl up in a ball and say, it's not fair, I shouldn't have to do anything. But I just want to invite you, when you're ready, to lift your head up, ask for help. You're here right now hearing this conversation, which means that you've done that, and keep going, because you're not done. You're not done.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Geoff. Thank you so much for being with us today. And where can people get a hold of you or get some information
Yeah,
about your...
you can listen to the podcast. My website has a place where you can sign up for my email list. But yeah, just on the I've got a resource called the First Steps to Rebuilding Trust, which is a free video series that you can download. I think I gave you the link to that.
Yeah, I'll put those in the show notes.
Yeah,
And
so
here in the
they
group.
can sign up for that and get that free video and watch, me talk for an hour about rebuilding trust. And yeah, happy to share all that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. We'll definitely make sure that's in the show notes, and then it'll
Thank you.
also be here below in the group. So thank you so much, Geoff. We're so grateful for having you. And thank you everyone for participating and connecting here in the group as well. Everybody, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the future.
Thank you. Bye-bye.